After the divorce, the pregnant wife married a millionaire. But what happened next shocked her ex in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Denver. Just beyond the city's edge, Emily Perez believed her marriage could never break. Until it did, leaving her with a newborn baby girl and a heart in pieces. She learned that promises could vanish as quickly as they were made. Clutching her baby girl close, she braced herself for a future without the man she once trusted completely. Then, like the sun peeking through a storm, a charming millionaire named Adrian Collins walked into her life. Their whirlwind romance and sudden wedding made headlines in local papers. But what came after would shake Emily's ex-husband to his core and unravel everything he thought he knew. Because sometimes second chances arrive wrapped in secrets no one sees coming. Emily Perez never imagined divorce papers would stain the oak coffee table in the living room she had decorated with so much care. The light gray walls that once held echoes of laughter now pulsed with an aching silence. Her husband, no, ex-husband, she corrected herself bitterly, Mark Dalton, packed the last of his things into old cardboard boxes. He kept insisting the breakup was mutual, but deep down, Emily felt blindsided. They had been together since their early 20s, building something real through late-night takeout and tiny apartments. For a while, it felt like love alone could keep them safe. But over the years, money troubles scraped away Mark's patience. His relentless push to rise higher at work slowly smothered the simple happiness they once shared. When Emily told him she was pregnant, she prayed it would pull them back together. Instead, Mark's frustrations spiraled out of control. He insisted they weren't ready to be parents. Every argument after that turned toxic. Some nights she would stand in the kitchen, pressing her forehead to the cold refrigerator door, wishing he would come home with the old grin she used to trust. She would whisper to her growing belly that love could fix this. Until it didn't. Now, cradling her 6-month-old daughter, Sophie, in her arms, Emily watched Mark's stiff shoulders as he dragged the last box to the door. He paused, his eyes flicking from her to the baby. A shadow of something, regret, maybe sorrow or guilt, crossed his face. She couldn't tell. The look disappeared just as quickly as it came. He muttered a flat goodbye and vanished into the drizzle. The metallic slam of the car trunk echoed through the gray afternoon. Emily sank onto the couch, tears sliding down her cheeks, worn out and shattered at 32. She might have fallen completely apart, if not for Sophie. Her baby's soft breath and tiny fingers reminded her she couldn't afford to crumble. She had a little soul depending on her. Her daughter's gentle coo reminded her she couldn't let despair swallow her whole. A tiny life was counting on her. In the quiet that settled around Emily, she let her eyes wander to the wedding photos lined up neatly on a side table, smiling faces frozen in brighter days. She shut her eyes and drew in a shaky breath. She had to keep going, but going on wasn't brave. It was just plain exhausting. There were nights she cried into her pillow while Sophie slept beside her. Nights when the weight of overdue bills, loneliness, and betrayal pressed so heavy on her chest she thought it might break her. Sometimes she'd slip out of bed, stand barefoot in the kitchen at 2 a.m., and press her palm flat against the fridge door, just to feel something solid when everything else felt like it was caving in. She'd watch Sophie's tiny chest rise and fall and promise the baby, promise herself, that tomorrow she'd stand up again, no matter how much it hurt. She clung to her old admin job at a small community nonprofit, barely managing to pay rent on a house that felt far too empty now. Her parents, kind and supportive, lived down in New Mexico, but they were dealing with health problems of their own. Emily refused to add to their worries. Sometimes, she whispered quiet apologies into the dark. Apologies to Sophie for not giving her more, apologies to herself for trusting a man who walked away, and to the future she once pictured so clearly. "Goodbye, Mark," she whispered, brushing a soft kiss to Sophie's forehead. The baby caught a piece of her hair, babbling in that sweet, innocent way that sparked the faintest flicker of hope in Emily's chest. If heartbreak had taught her anything, it was this. Love could fall apart, but a mother's devotion never would. In the weeks that followed, Emily battled questions about who she was now and what came next. She forced a new path for herself, one where she kept Sophie safe from the wreckage of the past. There were setbacks, tearful breakdowns in the grocery store parking lot, rejection letters for jobs that paid better. Sleepless nights spent adding up her meager paycheck, praying it would stretch until Friday. But she kept moving forward. What she didn't know was that fate was waiting to introduce someone who would shake up everything she believed about second chances and rattle Mark, the man who once swore to love her forever. Months trickled by, each day proof of Emily's quiet strength. She balanced motherhood, bills, and a constant low hum of betrayal. Her position at the nonprofit Community First kept the lights on. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her purpose. She helped struggling families find housing and jobs, and in helping them, she reminded herself she still had something worthwhile to give the world. On a brisk November morning, Emily stepped into the Community First office, juggling a diaper bag, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a stack of client folders. The crisp Denver air stung her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It helped her stay awake. After dropping Sophie off at the little daycare corner run by kind elderly volunteers, she hustled to her desk. She had barely settled into her chair when her supervisor, Carla Morrison, called her into a meeting. Expecting a standard check-in, Emily was caught off guard to find a tall, impeccably dressed man already sitting at the conference table. His calm presence filled the room, from the sharp cut of his charcoal suit to the polite, measured smile he offered. "This is Adrian Collins," Carla said warmly, motioning toward him. "He's here to discuss a potential partnership with Collins Holdings. They're interested in funding some of our programs." Emily's eyebrows lifted in surprise. She'd heard that name before. Adrian Collins was known in nonprofit circles for his strategic investments and carefully chosen charitable projects. Emily extended her hand politely, doing her best not to notice how his gaze lingered on her just a second longer than she expected. Adrian explained he was currently exploring organizations that tackled housing insecurity. He asked sharp, thoughtful questions about Community First results, community outreach, and long-term plans. To her own surprise, Emily spoke up, describing the daily struggles families faced: unemployment, mental health challenges, lack of access to medical care and childcare. Her voice carried raw honesty. Adrian listened intently, jotting notes now and then. Something about his calm, respectful way of asking questions settled her usual nerves. He lacked the smug superiority she had braced herself for from a wealthy philanthropist. When the meeting wrapped up, Adrian thanked both her and Carla and promised to have his team conduct a deeper program review. Then he turned back to her. "Your dedication is remarkable," he said with a nod. "I can see how much you care. People like you are rare." She blushed, mumbling a quick thank you before hurrying off to pick up Sophie for their midday break. But even as she walked down the hallway, Emily couldn't stop her thoughts from circling back to Adrian Collins and the quiet energy he carried with him. There had been an honesty in his tone she hadn't expected, especially from a millionaire. That evening, back at her small, rented duplex, Emily spoon-fed Sophie mashed carrots while gathering up stray toys from the living room floor. Still, she couldn't shake the memory of Adrian's steady gaze or the small flutter she'd felt when he spoke directly to her. Shoving the silly thought aside, she reminded herself what really mattered: bills, groceries, and Sophie's needs. What she didn't know was that her brief meeting with a powerful donor was only the beginning, a single ripple that would soon swell into a wave reaching all the way to Mark's doorstep and shaking everything he thought he knew. Over the next few weeks, Collins Holdings quietly launched a thorough review of Community First programs, digging through reports and performance data. Staff buzzed nervously, hoping this powerful company might become a steady and crucial funding source. Emily kept up with her usual workload: client meetings, family support sessions, and now and then she led tours for the visiting analysts. Through it all, she rarely saw Adrian in person, though Carla kept her updated about his growing interest in some proposed program expansions. But one late afternoon, just as she was getting ready to pack up for the day, Adrian appeared unexpectedly at her desk. "I'm glad I caught you," he said, holding a sleek black folder. "I've reviewed the final reports, but I'd really love to get your personal take over coffee, if you have a few minutes." Normally, Emily would have hesitated, especially since it was after work hours, but she remembered Carla's reminder of how vital Collins Holdings' support could be. And more than that, there was something in Adrian's calm, deliberate tone that made her feel noticed in a way she hadn't in so long. It startled her. How easily her heart stuttered at just being seen, like a part of her she'd locked away had stirred awake for the first time in years. She couldn't deny the flicker of curiosity sparking in her chest. "Sure," she said, checking the time. Sophie was in daycare until 6. She had a small window. "There's a cafe just down the street." They ended up at a cozy place softly lit by warm Edison bulbs. The hum of the rush hour crowd filled the space, but Emily found herself surprisingly at ease. Adrian pulled out a slim notebook and began asking thoughtful, probing questions. He asked about Community First's daily hurdles, the emotional strain on the staff, and Emily's own experiences. At first, she responded with her usual professional caution, but something about Adrian's steady eye contact and the way he genuinely listened chipped away at her guard. Each time she paused, expecting him to rush in with polished, empty reassurance, he didn't. He just waited, making space for the ache and the truth to spill out. Before she knew it, she was speaking openly, sharing heartbreaking stories of single mothers sleeping in cars, of children caught in relentless poverty cycles. At one point, she paused mid-sentence to blink back tears, and was surprised to see him quietly set his pen down, not to interrupt, but just to hold the space for her words. Her voice trembled sometimes, thick with emotion. Adrian listened with patient empathy, jotting down careful notes. He didn't offer shallow comfort. Instead, he nodded when it mattered, his expression tightening under the weight of what she shared, like he was carrying it alongside her. When they finally ran out of formal talking points, Emily reached to gather her bag, but Adrian didn't move right away. "I really appreciate your honesty," he said. "Sometimes these donations feel like nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet," Adrian said quietly. "You remind me there are real people behind every statistic." She gave him a small, appreciative smile. "That's why I'm here. These aren't just data points. They're families. They matter." A gentle warmth lingered in the space between them. Adrian's eyes drifted to the faint indentation on her ring finger, a silent mark where a wedding band used to be. "I have a feeling you have your own story, Emily." She swallowed hard, the weight of old memories pressing against her throat. "We all do," she said softly, leaving it at that. Then she glanced at the time. "I should pick up my daughter." The word daughter seemed to light something behind his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, but he only nodded politely. "Of course. Thank you again." As she stood, he rose with her. "Take care." That night, Emily tried to focus on bedtime routines, baths, lullabies, warm bottles, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Adrian's sincere way of listening. She reminded herself he was just a donor, nothing more. Still, as she replayed their conversation in her mind, she couldn't ignore how rare it felt to be truly heard. Not managed, not brushed aside, but really seen. And she couldn't deny the strange sense of comfort she felt in his company. She told herself it was just professional interest. Curling up beside Sophie's tiny sleeping form, she closed her eyes, unaware that an unexpected invitation was waiting just ahead. One that would pull her deeper into Adrian Collins' orbit, test her heart's ability to trust again, and begin a chain of events that would one day blindside Mark, who had no idea what path his ex-wife was about to walk. December arrived in a whirlwind of preparations, capped by the prestigious Summit Gala, an annual fundraiser co-hosted by Collins Holdings and several other major corporations. The buzz around Community First was that Adrian Collins planned to officially announce his company's partnership at the event. For Emily, the invitation felt both thrilling and daunting. A formal black-tie gala at the lavish Stonebridge Hotel, filled with Denver's most powerful business leaders and socialites. Carla urged Emily to go, insisting her presence would highlight the real-life impact of Collins Holdings funding. But Emily's tight budget didn't stretch to designer gowns or fancy salon visits. She worried about standing out for all the wrong reasons. Carla reassured her that the organization would cover everything. It was, after all, part of promoting their mission. Reluctantly, Emily agreed. She couldn't risk jeopardizing funding that could change everything for the families they served. On the night of the gala, she stepped into the grand ballroom, wearing a borrowed black satin dress with delicate beading and simple heels. Her friend, who worked part-time as a stylist, had pinned her hair into an elegant bun. Clutching the invitation in trembling hands, Emily stepped into the glittering ballroom. Soft orchestral music floated through the marbled hall, and crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm golden light. Emily scanned the crowd, nerves fluttering in her chest, until she spotted Carla near a towering ice sculpture. Letting out a quiet breath of relief, she hurried to join her. After a few polite introductions to other donors, Emily nursed a glass of ginger ale, her eyes darting nervously across the sea of designer gowns and sparkling jewelry. Then she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Adrian Collins stood behind her, looking every bit the polished host in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes gleamed with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you made it," he said with a smile. "You look—" He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "Elegant." A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm not really used to events like this." She gestured slightly to the swirl of celebrities, politicians, and high-profile CEOs mingling with practiced ease. A flicker of doubt twisted in her belly. She wondered if anyone here could tell she'd nearly cried herself to sleep the night before over Sophie's daycare fee. But Adrian's calm presence anchored her, reminding her why she was here. Not for them, but for the families who needed her voice. Adrian stayed at her side, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to key partners. He gently encouraged her to tell the real stories. The family's community first helped every single day. To her surprise, the more Emily spoke, the more her nerves faded. The donors leaned in, drawn to the sincerity in her voice. It dawned on her that Adrian hadn't put her on display. He'd made sure their mission was front and center. When the final round of champagne toasts ended, Adrian pulled her aside to a quieter corner. "They've pledged double what we projected," he said with a quiet, pleased smile. "Your passion made it happen." Emily's eyes brimmed with emotion. She glanced around the dazzling room, hardly believing this world of silk gowns and glittering chandeliers would soon change real lives for struggling families. "Thank you," she whispered. The gratitude meant not just for the donors, but for Adrian, who had backed their cause so sincerely. In that softly lit corner, his eyes lingered on her face. For a moment, something unspoken flickered between them. Then the band struck up a slow waltz, and couples drifted onto the dance floor. Adrian hesitated. "Would you like to dance, or do you need to get home to your daughter?" Emily bit her lip. For once, she wanted to enjoy a fleeting taste of normal life. She thought about the unpaid bills waiting at home, the laundry piled up, the exhaustion that never left her. But here, under this warm light, for just one moment, she wanted to remember who she was before her world cracked open. "Just one dance," she murmured. He took her hand, guiding her gently onto the polished marble floor. His touch was warm, steady, so different from the cold, distracted way Mark used to hold her in public. As the music rose around them, Emily felt, for a heartbeat, an unexpected spark of contentment. It crept in slowly, like sunlight spilling through a window she hadn't opened in years. Her steps were cautious at first, but there was something steady in Adrian's quiet confidence that anchored her. What Emily didn't see yet was that this simple dance would become the beginning of a deeper bond, one that would soon reshape her entire world and send ripples all the way back to Mark Dalton. The weeks after the gala brought subtle but meaningful changes to Emily's daily routine. Adrian Collins began stopping by Community First more often, officially to monitor the partnership's progress. But Emily sensed there was more to it. His visits were never hurried. He didn't glance at his watch. He brought her coffee with her name spelled right on the cup. He remembered exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. He lingered by her desk, asked thoughtful questions, many about her life as a single mom. Slowly, a quiet connection started to grow. It deepened over shared lunches and short walks to a small park near the office during her breaks. They laughed more than she expected, and sometimes they didn't say a word at all, but the silence never felt uncomfortable. In the beginning, Emily kept her guard up. She knew too well how fake warmth could disguise betrayal. Her marriage to Mark had taught her that. But the more time she spent with Adrian, the more real his presence felt. He never pried, though she could sense his genuine curiosity. When she spoke about Sophie, her bedtime songs, her baby giggles, Adrian listened closely, his attention completely focused on her words. He asked questions only someone truly interested would ask. What song makes her smile the most? Does she say mama yet? And when Emily described Sophie's tantrums or the small milestones that filled her days, Adrian didn't tune out. He leaned in, wanting every detail. One Saturday morning, he texted her. Would you help me organize a small supply drive? There's a daycare for working moms that really needs diapers, wipes, formula. Collins Holdings will sponsor it. Emily hesitated. She usually reserved her weekends for Sophie. Those days were sacred. Her whole world shrank to the sound of her daughter's giggles and the warmth of their morning pancakes. But the project matched her mission so perfectly that, eventually, she said yes. She began packing Sophie's diaper bag, planning to drop her off at the neighbor's house. But Adrian had other ideas. Bring her, he said simply. I'd love to meet her. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just polite the way he said it. He meant it. So Emily found herself standing in a sunny suburban community hall, sorting stacks of donated baby clothes, bottles, and care supplies. Sophie toddled around her in wide-eyed wonder, curiously exploring every corner of the bright, bustling room. Adrian arrived with a handful of Collins Holdings staff, giving directions to set up a donation table near the entrance. Once everything was neatly arranged, boxes of formula, diapers, tiny onesies folded in careful piles, his attention shifted to Sophie. The little girl, all soft curls and big, curious eyes, stared up at the tall stranger with fascination. To Emily's surprise, Adrian crouched down to her level and offered her a small plush bunny. Sophie squealed and grabbed it with a giggle. For the next hour, Adrian stayed engaged with her, letting her help place stuffed animals on the table, making silly faces that coaxed peals of laughter from the toddler. Emily watched, stunned. Something tugged painfully at her chest, an ache she hadn't let herself feel in so long. Watching him be so effortlessly gentle with Sophie felt like peeking into a version of her life she'd quietly convinced herself she didn't deserve. She had never seen a man around her daughter with this kind of patient, easy warmth. Not even Mark, back when he still lived with them, had shown this kind of gentle connection with his own child. When the volunteers wrapped up and the other staff had packed up to leave, only Emily, Adrian, and Sophie remained. Worn out from the day's excitement, Sophie dozed off in Emily's arms. Adrian offered them a ride home in his sleek black SUV. She hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. During the drive, Emily stole a glance at him and caught how his expression softened every time he checked the rearview mirror to peek at Sophie sleeping soundly in her car seat. Something stirred in her chest, a confusing mix of gratitude and longing. Later that night, as she rocked Sophie to sleep in their modest living room, Emily found herself replaying every gentle moment of Adrian Collins's kindness. She pressed her lips to Sophie's soft hair and wondered, what if love didn't have to hurt this time? What if there was room in her future for something safe and kind and whole? She imagined, for the first time in years, a world where a man could offer more than cold silence and sharp words. A pang of guilt twisted through her. She was still tangled in the wreckage of her messy love-hate history with Mark. But as Sophie burrowed closer into her chest, Emily realized something undeniable. Her daughter had naturally gravitated toward Adrian's warmth. And that simple, innocent truth chipped at the protective walls she'd spent so long building. But just as this fragile bond with Adrian quietly began to bloom, Emily's world jolted with an unexpected phone call. One gray afternoon, her phone screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months. Mark Dalton. Her stomach knotted tight. She hovered her thumb over the decline button. But curiosity and old wounds she couldn't quite bury made her answer. His voice hit her ear with a sharper edge than she remembered. Emily. I need to see you. It's important. A wave of irritation rolled through her. What for, Mark? We've been divorced for months. I know. He let out a heavy sigh. But, can I come by? Or maybe meet somewhere neutral? Please, there's something I need to tell you. Against her better judgment, Emily agreed to meet him at a small cafe near Community First. After her shift, she dropped Sophie off with her neighbor and made her way there, her heart pounding as old memories clawed their way to the surface. She spotted Mark by the window, anxiously drumming his fingers against a chipped coffee mug. He looked older, more worn down, worry lines cutting deep into his forehead. The polished image he once wore like armor was gone, replaced by a wrinkled, slightly rumpled suit. "Thanks for coming," Mark said, standing halfway up, his movements stiff and awkward. Emily gave a polite nod and sat across from him. A thick silence settled between them before Mark finally blurted out in a low rush, "I messed up, Emily. Life after the divorce. It's been hell. I lost my job at the firm, my finances are a mess, the woman I thought would... Well, that fell apart too." He let out a hollow laugh, but it sounded raw, not amused, more like a man frayed at the edges. His eyes searched her face, pleading for something he no longer deserved. Emily's jaw tensed. This was the same man who had left her alone with a newborn so he could chase promotions and empty promises. And now he sat here wanting her sympathy? She forced herself to breathe evenly. She had promised herself she'd stay calm. "I'm sorry things didn't turn out how you wanted," she said steadily, her voice cool. "But what does any of this have to do with me?" Mark fidgeted, spinning the coffee cup between restless hands. "I miss Sophie. I want to see her, maybe be in her life again." The words, hesitant and so late, hit her like a cold slap. He had never cared enough to be a father before. Not during the sleepless nights, when Sophie's cries echoed through the walls at 3 a.m. Not when the medical bills stacked higher than her paycheck. Not when she dragged herself home from double shifts barely able to stand. She studied him across the table, noting the rigid tension in his shoulders, a man cornered by his own mistakes. A part of her wanted to lash out, to scream Sulm, "Where were you when I needed you most?" But she kept her voice level, the ache simmering beneath the surface. "It's not that simple, Mark," she said quietly. "Sophie's just over a year old. He doesn't know you. You can't just come and go whenever you feel like it." Mark rubbed his temples, frustration bleeding into the cracks of his forced calm. "I know I messed up, but can you really blame me for wanting to make it right?" His voice cracked, just a hairline fracture that made something inside her soften, only for it to vanish as quickly as it came. Emily wasn't sure how much of this was real remorse and how much was just desperation. Still, there was a flicker of something. Regret, maybe. Or just fear. "I'll think about it," she said, her tone clipped. "But don't get your hopes up. I won't let you hurt her." A muscle twitched along Mark's jaw as he gave a tight nod. It felt rehearsed, like a man playing at humility rather than feeling it. Their meeting ended on a tense, sour note as Mark slouched out into the light drizzle. Emily stayed in her seat, staring out the window as he disappeared down the street, her chest knotted with anger and doubt. Back at home, her thoughts swirled. Part of her felt grim satisfaction, watching Mark face the fallout of his own choices. But another part braced for what it could mean. What if he let Sophie down again? What if opening that door now only reopened old wounds? Later that evening, her phone buzzed. It was Adrian. "Everything okay? You seemed a little distracted at work today." Emily stared at the message, torn between the calm warmth of his concern and the storm Mark had just thrown her back into. She typed back simply, "I'm fine. Thanks for checking." But the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She was anything but fine. Fate, it seemed, had dragged Mark back into her life just as a new door was beginning to open. And soon, the collision of those two worlds would set off a chain reaction no one could have predicted. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing Denver in a quiet, shimmering hush. Winter had arrived, and Community First was wrapping up another successful quarter, thanks in no small part to Collins Holdings' support. Because of that partnership, Emily found herself more and more within Adrian's orbit. He dropped by often, sometimes to brainstorm outreach ideas, other times to invite her to charity dinners or special events. Their bond deepened steadily, grounded in mutual respect and a shared mission. One crisp December evening, Adrian invited Emily to a small charity gathering, celebrating the opening of a new transitional housing complex. She felt a pang of guilt leaving Sophie with her neighbor yet again, but the cause was too close to her heart to turn down. And beneath that, she couldn't deny a quiet longing for a few hours to feel like more than just a tired single mom scraping by. Wrapped in a simple navy dress and a warm coat against the Denver chill, she arrived at the church hall where the event was held. Adrian, looking effortlessly sharp in a charcoal gray suit, greeted her at the entrance, a soft warmth in every word and gesture. Inside, the modest hall was lined with photos of families who would soon call the new apartments home. Emily spoke with quiet passion to the guests, explaining how permanent housing could break cycles of poverty and restore dignity to families fighting to get back on their feet. Adrian stood beside her, pride glowing in his eyes as he introduced her to key donors and praised her dedication. There was unmistakable warmth in his voice every time he spoke of her. And Emily caught a few guests glancing between them with knowing smiles, whispers of something unspoken but clearly felt. Later, as the evening wound down, they stepped outside into a gentle snowfall. The city lights bounced off the icy sidewalks, turning the quiet street into a glittering mosaic under their feet. As they neared her car, Adrian paused under a flickering street lamp, his hands buried in his coat pockets. There was a subtle nervousness about him that made Emily's heart skip. Adrian was never rattled, but tonight he was. "I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice low. "You and Sophie, you've brought something into my life I didn't even know I was missing." He exhaled, his breath ghosting in the cold night air. "I used to think wealth and purpose were enough. But you showed me the power of connection, what it means to truly be there for someone. My work feels different now, more real." He hesitated, then his words softened even more. "What if we tried to be more than friends?" Emily's breath caught. They danced around this possibility for weeks, stolen glances, half-finished sentences, but hearing it out loud cracked something open in her chest. After everything with Mark, after all the heartbreak and betrayal, was she really ready? Her pulse raced under her coat, and for a split second, fear roared louder than hope. But beneath it, a gentler truth flickered. Maybe she had already begun to trust him, piece by fragile piece. Adrian seemed to sense her doubt. "I know your trust was broken before," he said gently. "I'd never rush you, but I need you to hear this. I love you, Emily. I want to be part of your life and Sophie's, if you'll let me." Tears pricked her eyes. No one had spoken words like that to her in so long, without demands, without conditions, just love. Steady, patient, real. It felt like standing at the edge of something terrifying and breathtaking all at once. Emotion and fear wrestled inside her. She thought of Mark, how easily his charm had curdled into disappointment. But Adrian wasn't Mark. He had been patient, respectful, kind, consistently so. Still, the words were almost too big to hold. I care about you too," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "But I have to protect my daughter." Adrian nodded, relief and tenderness mingling on his face. "We'll go at your pace," he said softly. "I just needed you to know how I feel." She whispered, leaning just slightly into his warmth, heart pounding so hard she wondered if he could hear it. Snowflakes landed on her eyelashes, melting into trembling tears she couldn't quite hold back. It had been so long since someone gave her patience instead of pressure, presence instead of empty promises. She couldn't offer him promises back, not yet. But standing there, in that quiet, snow-dusted street, Emily felt something shift. A door in her heart cracked open at last. Adrian Collins' confession lingered between them, hopeful, patient, a vow that, if carefully nurtured, might change everything. As the holidays rolled in, Emily found herself tangled in a swirl of emotions. Adrian's heartfelt words echoed in her mind. She confided in Carla, who beamed with a grin that made Emily blush. "Not everyone gets a second chance," Carla said warmly, squeezing her hand. "Especially not with a man who's the real thing." Emily tried to smile back, but her thoughts tugged her two ways. Fear of the past repeating itself, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time love wouldn't end in ruin. But even as her heart leaned into something new, Mark's recent call loomed like a cloud. His sudden wish to see Sophie shadowed every decision. Emily dreaded letting him in, only to have him vanish again, leaving new scars behind. New Year's Eve arrived, buzzing with both excitement and nerves. Adrian had invited Emily and Sophie to spend the holiday at a cozy mountain cabin he'd rented in the Rockies, along with a handful of close friends. At first, Emily hesitated. Traveling with a toddler to meet strangers sounded like a recipe for chaos. She pictured Sophie crying all night, awkward conversations, feeling out of place. But Adrian's quiet reassurance and the hope of a real holiday escape won her over. The cabin sat tucked deep in a snowy forest, its warm lights glowing soft and golden against frost-covered pines. Inside, a crackling fire threw a gentle glow over the rustic wood-paneled walls. Adrian's friends, a warm mix of old childhood buddies and trusted partners, welcomed Emily with genuine kindness. No one treated her like some charity project the way Mark's circle once had. They treated her like she belonged. They fussed over Sophie, who squealed with delight at everything. The dancing firelight, the sparkling snow just beyond the windows. The evening flowed with laughter and warmth over steaming bowls of homemade stew, fresh-baked bread, and trays of holiday pastries. To her surprise, Emily felt at ease among people she'd only just met. She didn't feel small or out of place. Adrian stayed close, always including her, especially when the chatter drifted into technical debates about nonprofit strategies or big business ventures. Whenever she felt that old urge to shrink back or quietly slip away, Adrian would glance her way with a small, knowing nod. A silent promise, "I've got you." Later that night, with Sophie dozing softly in a makeshift crib near the fire, the adults sipped champagne and swapped stories about the year gone by. They talked about growth, risks, and fresh dreams. As midnight crept close, everyone bundled up and stepped out into the crisp mountain air to watch. The private fireworks Adrian had arranged began to crackle and bloom above the snowy treetops. Emily wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders, cradling a drowsy Sophie against her chest. The sky exploded in bursts of pink, gold, and green, painting the quiet forest in fleeting splashes of color. Gentle oohs and ahs rose from the small group around them with each shimmering blast. Adrian moved closer to her under the flicker of the fireworks, his face bathed in the soft, changing glow, calm, content, and full of quiet affection. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for being here," he murmured. "I know this might feel like a leap." Emily smiled, leaning a little closer into his warmth. "A leap, yes, but it feels right." At the stroke of midnight, cheers and laughter erupted all around them. Friends hugged and clinked champagne glasses in celebration. Adrian carefully lifted Sophie from Emily's arms, pressing a tender kiss to the little girl's forehead. Then he turned to Emily, emotion shining in his eyes, brightened by the dazzling cascade overhead. He leaned in and kissed her gently. Time seemed to hush around them. The kiss was soft but certain, carrying unspoken promises and quiet hope. In that single breath, Emily realized she was stepping into a new chapter. One that might look nothing like the life she'd once thought was her only chance at happiness. Gratitude filled her chest, tangled with the clear understanding that things could still get complicated. Because real love stories aren't just about fireworks and perfect kisses under snowy skies, they're about the messy truths that surface when you least expect them. And soon enough, Mark would push his way back in. January arrived, bringing fresh routines. Emily moved forward in careful, steady steps with Adrian. They spent more time together beyond office hours, sharing simple dinners at her small kitchen table, where he made Sophie giggle with silly spoon tricks and soft peekaboo games. Emily couldn't help but feel touched at how naturally Adrian fit into the everyday chaos of raising a toddler. Meanwhile, Mark lingered at the edges of her new life, texting now and then, asking if she might reconsider letting him see Sophie. Emily stayed firm. She told him if he truly wanted to be a father this time, he'd need to prove it with actions, steady work, real consistency, maybe counseling. Something real. To her surprise, Mark replied that he'd accepted a job at a smaller firm and had started therapy. It was a step, a small one, but not enough to earn back her trust. Then, on a cool Saturday afternoon, Adrian invited Emily and Sophie to Collins Holdings' annual staff celebration, a big gathering hosted at a countryside estate just outside the city, with employees, executives, and their families all in attendance. Emily hesitated at first, wondering if bringing Sophie was a good idea, but Adrian assured her the event was family-friendly and he'd love for both of them to come. With a nervous but hopeful heart, she agreed. The estate's sprawling grounds were dotted with winter gardens, cozy bonfire pits, and a heated pavilion filled with games and crafts for children. Inside the main hall, the warm air buzzed with laughter, soft acoustic guitar music, and the comforting scent of mulled cider drifting through the crowd. Sophie, bundled snugly in her little coat and hat, toddled after a small group of other kids, her big brown eyes wide with wonder. Emily stayed nearby, introducing herself to various Collins Holdings employees. Some recognized her from charity event photos beside Adrian. She had braced herself for side glances, judgment, maybe whispers about her motives. But to her surprise, most people were kind, some even warmly welcoming. A few commented how much Adrian had changed since meeting her, how he seemed lighter, more open, more grounded. Later, during a lull in the festivities, Adrian gently guided Emily out to a quiet terrace overlooking a frozen lake. The winter stillness wrapped around them, broken only by the distant laughter of children echoing across the grounds. He turned toward her, his expression more serious than she was used to seeing. "Emily, there's something I want you to know." Her heart skipped. "We've only just begun," she said softly. "I'm still figuring this out." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know, and I want you to take all the time you need. But there's something else. My mother, Celia Collins, she's coming back from Europe next week. She's very traditional when it comes to the family's reputation. I expect she'll be skeptical about me dating a single mom." A flicker of tension crossed his face. "I want you to be prepared. I'll stand by you, of course, but I know how she can be." Emily swallowed hard. Old memories stung at the edges of her mind. How Mark's social circle had once whispered about her behind her back, always implying she was never quite enough. She drew a deep breath and steadied her shoulders. "I'm not ashamed of my life or my daughter," she said firmly. "If she wants to judge me, that's on her. It won't change how I feel about you." Relief softened Adrian's features. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the clean scent of pine carried on the estate's winter air. But beneath the quiet moment, a ripple of unease stirred inside her. Emily knew a confrontation was coming, because when love collides with wealth and expectation, the calm never lasts forever. And elsewhere in the city, Mark was making plans of his own, determined not to disappear from the new life Emily was building without him. Emily's first meeting with Celia Collins took place over an understated brunch at one of Denver's elegant townhouses. Adrian had arranged it himself, hoping to set a warm, respectful tone from the beginning. Emily's stomach twisted with nerves. She dressed conservatively, a soft blue blouse and neat slacks, while Sophie wore a sweet pastel dress, her hair brushed smooth and tidy. When they arrived, the doorman guided them into a refined sitting room where Celia awaited. A tall woman in her early 60s, carrying herself with a natural grace and an air of polished control. Celia rose gracefully from a velvet armchair to greet Adrian with a measured hug. Then her eyes shifted to Emily and the child in her arms. A flicker, barely there, of surprise crossed Celia's poised expression before she offered a polite but faintly distant smile. "Miss Perez, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins," Emily said softly, dipping her head in greeting. "This is my daughter, Sophie." Celia's eyes swept over Sophie. "Well, hello there, sweetheart." She extended one slender finger, which Sophie regarded with wide, cautious eyes, clutching Emily's blouse a little tighter. Sensing the quiet tension already threading through the room, Adrian quickly guided them all to the dining table, where delicate china glowed under the soft light. Discreet servers moved in to pour fragrant tea into porcelain cups. Once settled, Celia steered the conversation with gentle small talk, though her questions carried a subtle edge of scrutiny. She inquired about Emily's upbringing, her job at Community First, and her family back in New Mexico. When Emily spoke about her work, she answered sincerely, her voice steady, but inside she felt each word weighed and filed away. She could almost see the quiet ledger behind Celia's calm eyes. Background, income, social fit, columns being mentally checked or left blank. Celia wasn't openly unkind, but the composed, searching look in her eyes said enough. She was quietly appraising whether this single mother from a non-profit world could ever fit within the Collins family legacy. The gentle clink of silverware, the perfectly balanced flower arrangements, even the soft chamber music. Everything about this brunch radiated quiet authority. And Emily, for all her calm demeanor, couldn't help but feel like a mismatched thread in an otherwise flawless tapestry. She fought the old sting of shame that tried to creep up her spine. The same shame she'd battled after Mark's family had once called her not enough. She refused to let it show now. Adrian did his best to shift the tone, praising Emily's role in developing new outreach programs and the fresh energy she'd brought to Community First's mission. Celia nodded graciously, her lips curving only slightly, yet her distance remained. Midway through the meal, Celia set her teacup down with graceful precision and folded her hands in her lap. "Adrian has spoken of a serious attachment here," she said evenly, her voice smooth as glass. "I'm curious, Miss Perez, what are your intentions for the future?" Heat rose in Emily's cheeks. She knew this was about more than just tomorrow's plans. It was a delicate probe into stability, reputation, and whether she met the unspoken standards that came with the Collins name. She drew a quiet, steady breath. "I'm devoted to raising my daughter and continuing my work with Community First," she said clearly. "Adrian and I have become very close, but we're taking things one step at a time. Our focus is on building a stable future for Sophie." There it was, a faint twitch in Celia's perfectly groomed eyebrow. Polite, but unmistakable, like Emily had just given the wrong answer on a test she hadn't known she was taking. Celia's eyes flicked briefly to Adrian, then back to Emily. "And the child's father? Are there entanglements we should be aware of?" The air in the room seemed to chill instantly. Emily felt it tighten around her collarbone, the way a woman just knows when curiosity turns to cold assessment. Before she could answer, Adrian spoke up, calm but firm. "That's not something you need to worry about, Mother. Emily has full custody." Celia's lips pressed into a thin line, but when she spoke again, her tone softened, just enough to pass for grace. "I don't mean to pry. I've simply seen how complicated these situations can become. The Collins family has always protected its own. Adrian's future comes with certain responsibilities." Responsibilities. Emily heard it like a polite sentence handed down from a judge. Not personal, just legacy. But what about love? What about decency? Her spine straightened as the meaning settled in. She and Sophie could be seen as baggage, or worse, a risk. But Emily drew herself up and answered with a calm, courteous smile. "I understand your concern. Adrian and I are working through this together. My only priority is Sophie's well-being." It was the right answer, smooth and neutral, but beneath it burned quiet fire. A promise to herself that she would never apologize for being a mother or for surviving everything that brought her here. The brunch wrapped up with a thin layer of civility, polished on the surface, tense underneath. As Adrian helped Emily and Sophie out to the waiting car, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know she can be intense, but I won't let her come between us." Emily exhaled slowly, hugging Sophie a little tighter against her chest. Memories flickered of Mark's mother, who used to drop sly comments about her lack of pedigree and modest career. This felt painfully similar. But Adrian's quiet strength next to her offered something she hadn't had back then, real reassurance. Still, she knew this relationship would be tested, by money, by status, by the ghosts of her past. Only time would tell if their fragile bond could weather it all. And time, she knew too well, always had surprises waiting. For now, Emily avoided any direct clashes with Celia, trusting that patience might soften old expectations, or at least make them tolerable. Meanwhile, Mark's repeated messages asking to see Sophie gnawed at her more each day. She weighed the emotional gamble of letting him back into their daughter's life, wondering if this time he'd stay. Could a father-daughter bond even grow this late? After all the heartbreak he'd left behind? Every time Mark's name lit up her phone, a pulse of dread followed, curling tight in her chest. The past didn't knock politely. It barged back in, loud and entitled. One late afternoon, after wrapping up her shift at Community First, Emily read a terse message from Mark. "I'm in town. Let me see her. 1 hour. Cafe on Maple Street. No more excuses." She exhaled shakily, her fingers trembling around the phone. Part of her wanted to delete the message and block his number for good. But something in his tone, something rawer than his usual guilt or arrogance, hinted at real desperation this time. "Fine. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., she typed back. "But I'm not promising anything." The next day she brought Sophie, nervous, cautious, and honestly dreading it. She hated the idea of reintroducing her daughter to the man who had once chosen everything else over them both. Mark was already there when she arrived, hunched in a corner booth. He looked thinner, older somehow, his once proud sharpness dulled, the tailored confidence that used to cloak him now frayed at every edge. His eyes widened the moment he spotted Sophie, a bright-eyed toddler now, curls bouncing as she hid behind Emily's leg. Emily caught the slump in his shoulders, the shimmer of tears he didn't bother to hide. "She's grown so much," Mark rasped, his voice rough and small. At first, Sophie clung to Emily's leg, studying the unfamiliar man warily. With gentle coaxing, Emily nudged her toward Mark's outstretched hands. Sophie stared up at him with curious eyes. A few tense minutes ticked by. Then Mark pulled a silly face, and Sophie giggled. Just like that, a fleeting thread of connection sparked, like a glimpse into a life that might have been. Emily felt it too, a soft ache that whispered, maybe it could have been different. Maybe this could have been easy. But just as quickly, reality thudded back into her ribs. She remembered every sleepless night, every unanswered text, every slammed door. The ache soured into resolve, but the warmth dissolved almost instantly. Mark shifted, clearing his throat, looking anywhere but at her. "Listen, Emily, I've been having a rough time. I lost my job. Money's tight. I'm behind on rent." She sat straighter, her guard snapping back into place. He kept talking, eyes darting toward the floor. "I was wondering, maybe you could help me out, or maybe your new boyfriend could." The air around them seemed to freeze. Emily felt her pulse hammer in her ears. A rush of heat burned up her neck, rage and disbelief mixing with the old bruise of betrayal he'd left behind. "What did you just say?" she hissed. Mark leaned forward, voice dropping to a harsh whisper, eyes flicking around the cafe. "Look, I know this Adrian Collins guy has deep pockets. If you two are so serious, maybe he could help me get back on my feet." "You're asking me to beg Adrian for money? To bail you out?" She couldn't keep her voice calm now. It cracked, sharp and cold. "That's unbelievable, Mark. Is that why you wanted to see Sophie? Not for her, just for this?" He reached across the sticky table and grabbed her wrist, his grip too tight, his breath sour with desperation. "You owe me. We had plans until you decided to keep the baby. Then you blew up our marriage." His grip wasn't painfully tight, but it was invasive, like a cold hand pressing right into the center of her chest. The accusation hit her like a slap. Color flared in Emily's cheeks as she yanked her arm free, her pulse crashing in her ears. "You left me alone with Sophie. Don't you dare twist it around." Sophie whimpered at the rising tension, her big eyes glistening with confused tears. Mark's face contorted with frustration, the desperation cracking into something sharper, meaner. "Don't push me, Emily. If Collins is really serious about you, maybe I'll push for custody. You know how the system works. Some judge might question your stability. A millionaire fiancé, your little non-profit paycheck, jumping from one mess to another man." Emily's whole body trembled. She instinctively pulled Sophie closer, shielding her with her arm. This wasn't guilt anymore. It was blackmail, plain and simple. The warmth Mark had shown Sophie moments before now felt like a lie. A tool. "Stay away from us," she hissed, her voice trembling but fierce. She scooped Sophie into her arms, ignoring the startled stares from nearby tables. With tears burning her eyes, she bolted from the cafe, her boots pounding the icy Denver sidewalk. She didn't remember the streets she crossed, only the drum of her heartbeat, Sophie's soft sobs against her neck, and the poisonous echo of Mark's threat rattling in her mind. By the time she reached her small apartment, her mind was a wildfire of fear and rage. Mark's desperation had rotted into something vicious. He would tear her apart if he thought it would get him what he wanted. He would risk destroying the fragile peace she had finally begun to build with Adrian. That evening, her voice shaking, Emily told Adrian everything. His jaw tightened, eyes dark with a rage he kept carefully contained. "I will do whatever it takes to protect you both," he said, his tone low and resolute. "We'll handle this legally, completely. He won't get away with this." He pulled her close, wrapping her in the solid certainty of his arms. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to lean all the way in, to let someone stand with her instead of forcing herself to stand alone. But even wrapped in his warmth, a cold shiver slid down her spine. She had found something precious, something she never thought she deserved, and now her past was clawing to tear it apart. What she couldn't know yet was that the next chapter of her life was already accelerating faster than any of them could imagine. And it would soon bring a revelation that would leave Mark utterly blindsided. The weight of Mark's threat hung heavy over Emily and Adrian. Determined to get ahead of any legal ambush, Adrian arranged a meeting with one of the best family law attorneys in Denver. The lawyer confirmed that Mark could technically file for partial custody, but only if he could prove Emily was an unfit mother. Thankfully, the attorney reassured them that Mark's spotty presence, unemployment, and erratic behavior would severely weaken any claim he tried to build. Still, the anxiety settled like a stone in Emily's chest. Seeing how the stress wore her down, Adrian insisted on hiring a full private legal team, paid for entirely by Collins Holdings. At first, Emily resisted. She hated feeling dependent on his wealth. The old echoes of judgment, Celia's cold glances, and society's gossip still rattled in the back of her mind. But when it came to Sophie's safety, there was no room for pride. So she agreed, reluctantly but deeply grateful. Meanwhile, Celia Collins remained watchful, her silence carrying all the weight of unspoken disapproval. She never said outright that Emily wasn't good enough, but she didn't need to. Her quiet distance did the talking for her. Amid the legal meetings and tension, Adrian planned something small, something gentle. One breezy spring evening, he invited Emily and Sophie to visit a newly renovated playground funded by the Collins Foundation. It sat tucked in a beautiful park on the edge of the Rockies, where the air smelled of pine and the laughter of children filled the dusk. Sophie squealed in delight, racing between the swings and slides, giggling at the top of her lungs. A kind volunteer caretaker offered to keep an eye on her, giving Emily and Adrian a few precious moments alone. They strolled slowly along the water's edge, lanterns flickering soft gold as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in lavender and fiery orange. Emily breathed it in, this rare, quiet peace, even knowing it wouldn't last forever. Adrian walked in silence beside her, hands buried deep in his pockets, his brow drawn in thought. When they reached a small scenic overlook, he stopped and turned to face her fully. "Emily," he said, his voice soft, trembling a little. "These last few months, they've been the best part of my life. You and Sophie, you filled a space I didn't even know was empty." Emily's heart thudded so hard she thought he might hear it over the rustle of the trees. Part of her wanted to stop him, to say it was too soon, too fragile, too complicated. But another part, tired of fear, starved for hope, wanted him to say every word. He paused, took a slow breath, then dropped to one knee. For one breathless heartbeat, the world tilted. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears brimmed in her eyes. There he was, Adrian Collins, the philanthropic millionaire who had once walked into her nonprofit office like a stranger, now kneeling before her in the fading golden light, a small velvet box resting in his palm. The diamond inside caught the lantern glow, glittering like a promise. "I know everything is complicated," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I want to stand by you, protect you, and be a father to Sophie. If you'll let me," he opened the box. "Emily Perez, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. The world fell silent around her, no past, no doubts, just this raw, overwhelming, real moment. Her mind flickered through every heartbreak with Mark, the loneliness, the years she'd carried everything alone. But Adrian's love had been steady, unwavering, through judgment, through threats, through fear. She looked at the ring, then at the man who had never once flinched at the truth of her life. A sob caught in her throat, because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that maybe she didn't deserve this happiness, but his steady eyes told her otherwise. He loved her messy truth, not some polished version she could never maintain. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. Adrian rose and wrapped her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in a warm, spinning embrace. Their lips met in a kiss, soft, emotional, real. The spring breeze danced around them, tangling her hair as a few passing strangers, realizing what had just happened, broke into happy applause. Emily clung to him, laughing and crying all at once, her heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in years, hope, untangled from fear. Through her tears, she laughed and turned to see Sophie toddling toward them with the volunteer, as if even she could sense on something big had just shifted forever. To Emily, the proposal felt like diving off a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating, but Adrian's love gave her the courage to believe in a future where her past could no longer chain her down. Meanwhile, across Denver, Mark would soon learn about the engagement in a way that shattered every assumption he clung to. pushing him closer to the edge of consequences he thought he'd outrun. The final confrontation loomed close, carrying truths none of them could have imagined. In the whirlwind weeks that followed, the Collins family moved swiftly to plan an intimate but elegant wedding. Celia Collins maintained her polished civility, though Emily could still sense the skepticism buried beneath each tight smile. But Adrian made his wishes crystal clear. No spectacle, just close friends, family, and a few trusted colleagues. Emily's co-workers from Community First were among those personally invited. When Emily informed Mark, more out of courtesy than obligation, his reaction landed first as stunned silence, then spiraled into a relentless stream of text messages. Demands, accusations, pitiful excuses. "You never gave me a chance. You never believed in me." But Emily had seen every version of those words before, painted with different excuses and empty promises. This time, she didn't answer. She wouldn't allow him to poison her joy, not again. She had her attorney ready in case Mark dared to make good on any threat to ruin what she had built. Let him rage. She had rebuilt her peace with bricks he once smashed to pieces. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of a small, charming chapel Adrian had chosen for their ceremony. Emily stood in a simple yet graceful lace gown, her hands trembling slightly as Carla adjusted her veil, beaming with the proud warmth of a sister. Nearby, Monica dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, whispering how she had never seen Emily look so beautiful. Little Sophie, dressed in a tiny white suit with suspenders, clung to Emily's skirt, babbling and giggling at the soft rustle of her train. Emily glanced down at her daughter and felt the weight and the wonder of everything that had brought her here. The divorce, the betrayal, the breathtaking struggle of single motherhood. And now, a horizon wide open with hope. This wasn't just a wedding. It was survival made holy. She drew in a slow, steady breath and stepped into the aisle. A soft violin melody floated through the chapel, wrapping the space in warmth. At the altar, Adrian stood waiting in a tailored navy suit, his eyes locked on hers, unwavering, steady, brimming with love. As Emily moved toward him, she caught the shimmer of tears gathering in his eyes. The officiant's words blurred into a gentle hum, wrapped in her heartbeat and the weight of Adrian's thumb brushing reassuring circles over her knuckles. They spoke their vows, honest and deliberate, each line a promise of loyalty, of trust, and a shared devotion to Sophie's happiness and safety. "By the power vested in me," the officiant declared, voice resonant and kind, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause and quiet cheers rippled through the chapel as Adrian leaned in, sealing their vows with a kiss, soft, sure, and filled with every promise yet to come. And at that exact moment, Mark slipped in through the back door of the chapel, uninvited. He froze in the threshold. From the altar, Emily caught sight of him, his eyes locked on hers, a storm bottled up behind a thin glass wall. The past smashed into the present in a single sharp heartbeat. No one breathed. Then Mark pushed forward, striding up the aisle as guests shifted uncomfortably, the hush around them cracking under the weight of his fury. Emily's breath caught, but Adrian stepped forward instantly, calm, protective, planting himself between her and the man who had once left her alone with everything. "You really did it," Mark spat, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. "Married into money. Didn't even give me a chance to fix what we had." Emily steadied her voice, her new ring still warm on her finger. "We stopped being a family a long time ago, Mark." She said it firmly, her voice clear and unwavering for the first time in years. "You made your choices. Now I've made mine." Mark's face twisted in anger. He opened his mouth to spit out more venom, but Adrian gave a quiet signal to the security team. Two ushers stepped forward without fuss, calmly but firmly steering Mark back down the aisle. He struggled at first, barking threats that fell flat against the chapel's walls. The sound of the doors shutting behind him was louder than any curse, a final period on a chapter Emily had long since outgrown. As soon as the doors closed, Emily exhaled in a rush of trembling relief. Adrian turned and gathered her into his arms, holding her close while the chapel filled once more with warmth, soft applause, and the quiet buzz of a future they had fought so hard to reach. Guests let out their collective breath, some blinking back tears. The ceremony might have teetered on the edge of chaos, but their vow was sealed, untouched. Emily, now Mrs. Collins, stood tall at the altar, a surge of defiant strength beating in her chest. Mark's desperate stunt had done nothing but spotlight how far she'd come. In the days that followed, Emily and Adrian escaped on a short honeymoon to a quiet villa on the sun-kissed coast of Santorini, Greece. Sophie giggling in tow. The island's whitewashed houses and shimmering blue sea offered the kind of calm she had only dreamed of before. Each morning, they lingered over breakfast on a terrace drenched in sunlight, while Sophie chased butterflies and explored the winding stone paths. For the first time in years, Emily's laughter came easily. Unburdened, unafraid. The gentle rhythm of peace felt foreign, but beautifully so. Each evening they sipped local wine under the setting sun, talking about the future, expanding community first, building a home full of trust and love, and maybe, one day, giving Sophie a sibling. Mark's dramatic wedding scene had shaken them both, but Adrian's quiet, steadfast love never once faltered. If any custody threat still lurked, they trusted the legal team to handle it. For the first time in forever, Emily felt secure. She wasn't surviving the past anymore. She was building something real, lasting, and fully hers with someone who loved both her and Sophie without hesitation. But everything changed the day they returned to Denver. Waiting at the door of the Collins penthouse was a thick envelope. Inside, a paternity test result addressed to Mark Dalton. Emily's eyes flew over the page, her breath stuttering to a halt as she read the line. Probability of paternity, 0%. A note in Mark's familiar, careless scrawl glared up at her. So you see, Sophie was never mine. Hope you're proud. Her knees threatened to buckle. She pressed a palm to the doorframe, fighting the wave of nausea rising up her throat. Was this real? Or just one more cruel twist from a man who couldn't stand that she'd found a life without him? Her mind screamed, impossible. She had traced every date, every heartbeat. There had never been another man. Never. Her heartbeat pounded so loud it drowned out every other sound. The floor seemed to shift beneath her. Logic slammed into emotion, her mind looping back and back. The timing, her pregnancy, the nights she'd counted on her fingers. She had never been unfaithful. Never. Could it be real? Could the test be a lie, forged out of spite, or a mistake? Adrian, reading the shock on her face, took the papers gently from her trembling hands. He scanned them in silence, then looked at her, jaw tight but eyes calm. "This is nonsense," he said, voice steady. "We both know your truth. This doesn't change what's real." Adrian's voice anchored her in the present, but Emily couldn't stop the doubt from creeping in, curling around her spine like cold smoke. What if there had been a lab mistake, or worse? What if this was Mark's final act of sabotage, designed to plant a seed of uncertainty right where her healing had finally begun to bloom? The following week, Adrian's legal team uncovered the truth. Mark had filed the test in a last-ditch legal stunt, trying to free himself from child support by claiming he had zero paternity. His plan was simple. Argue that if he wasn't Sophie's biological father, he had no rights, no obligations, no ties left at all. Emily felt sick. After threatening to fight for custody, now he wanted to erase himself entirely from Sophie's life. To her, it wasn't just cold, it was cowardly, hiding behind forged paperwork instead of facing what real fatherhood looked like. But why now? Why crash her wedding, beg for a chance, then pull this? Collins Holdings' legal team quickly dismissed it for what it was. A desperate, petty ploy to provoke Emily into a fight. It was pitiful, really. A weak attempt to regain control over a story he'd already lost. But even a hollow threat can leave a bruise. Adrian, ever steady, gently encouraged Emily to take an independent DNA test, if only to silence that whisper of doubt forever. She agreed. Waiting for the results felt like living someone else's nightmare. One last cruel chapter she hadn't asked for, but had to see through to the end. The results arrived exactly as she'd always known in her heart. Mark was Sophie's biological father. The forged test had been just that, a lie, spun for maximum damage, meant to wound and confuse. With this final deception exposed, Mark's true motives were undeniable. Manipulate, deflect, escape responsibility at any cost. Word of the so-called paternity scandal trickled through Denver's high society circles, falling from the same lips that had once whispered behind her back about the gold digger with a kid. But this time, the truth spread faster than the rumors. Those same people now shook their heads in disbelief. At him. The tide turned. not because Emily fought louder, but because she stood her ground. The fraud overshadowed the gossip, and in the end, the scandal Mark hoped would ruin her only unmasked him for what he was, a liar and a coward. Finally free of his manipulations, Emily opened her new life wide. She knew now that when false stories collapse, they leave room for something real to flourish. Sometimes the deepest heartbreaks become doorways to unexpected hope. What once felt like survival became something brighter, thriving. For Emily Perez, divorce had once looked like an ending too big to bear. But it wasn't the ending at all. In fighting to raise her child alone, she found an unexpected light in Adrian Collins, a man whose generosity and loyalty went deeper than any wealth. Together, they tore down old prejudices, weathered family skepticism, and outlasted every desperate ploy of a bitter ex. They didn't just rebuild, they reimagined what love could mean. With quiet courage and unshakable trust, they created something extraordinary, a life where Emily's independence was cherished, and Sophie was wrapped in true, unconditional fatherly devotion. If this journey of broken promises, reclaimed trust, and the wild turns of fate moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these real-life inspired stories alive. Stories filled with heart, unexpected twists, and the unwavering belief that every ending can also be a beginning. So that's how Emily's journey comes to a close, or maybe how her real beginning unfolds. My dear friends, you're still here with me now, right? If you stayed till this last word, I know something in this story must have touched your heart in its own quiet way. Let's pause and look at what Emily's story really reminds us. That heartbreak doesn't get the last word if we choose to stand up again. Like the Stoics teach, we cannot control what others do, but we can control how we respond. Emily's life shows us that pain can shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. She lost love, dignity, trust, but piece by piece, she built a new truth with her own hands. She dared to trust again, to say yes to something safe, patient, and real, even when the past tried to drag her back. And isn't that what we're all trying to do? To protect our hearts without shutting them off forever? To forgive ourselves for the times we didn't know better? To remember, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Emily didn't win by fighting dirty or proving herself louder. She won by living well, by loving her child fiercely, loving a good man bravely, and refusing to let lies rewrite her truth. If you too have ever felt broken by betrayal, I hope her story reminds you. Your past can't hold you hostage forever. You are worthy of a life rebuilt with gentle hands and fierce hope. If you felt that in your chest today, I'd love you to like this story, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can keep telling more tales of love, loss, healing, and second chances. Thank you for staying till the very end. You're not alone. Not here. Not ever.